What would you do if you woke up one morning and your body became your prison? Your legs, useless. Your arms, dead weight. Your empire, crumbling around you like sand through fingers you can no longer feel. And the only person willing to stay by your side, to feed you, to bathe you, to give you dignity when everyone else has fled into the comfort of their own lives, is someone you destroyed years ago without even knowing their name. How would you face them? How would you face yourself? How would you find the strength to keep breathing? This is a story about a man who had everything the world could offer. Private jets that kissed the clouds, a penthouse that overlooked the sparkling chaos of Lagos, women who worshipped at the altar of his wealth, and power that made grown men tremble at the mere mention of his name. But Daniel Okonkwo never truly saw the world around him. He was too busy conquering it, too obsessed with accumulating more, to notice the lives he crushed beneath his designer shoes. The small business owners he bankrupted, the families he displaced, the dreams he shattered with a single signature on documents he never bothered to read. It took losing the ability to move for him to finally open his eyes. And what he discovered in that terrible, beautiful stillness would break him into 1,000 pieces before slowly, painfully, remaking him into something worth saving. They say when you cannot move, you finally learn to see. And when you cannot hold on to your wealth, you discover what is truly worth holding. Once upon a time, in the glittering heart of Lagos, there lived a man who thought he was a god. This is the story of how he learned to become human. Before we dive in, can I ask you for a quick favor? This story took days of effort, writing, recording, editing, every moment crafted with care. Supporting me doesn't cost a thing, but it means the world. So if you enjoy what you're seeing, tap that like button, subscribe if you haven't yet, and drop a comment with your location. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. I read every single one, and I'll be shouting out some of you in the next video. Alright, let's get back to the story of passing cars, their flashes creating a strobe effect against the humid Lagos night. Women in designer dresses pressed against the barriers, calling his name, hoping to catch his eye for even a single moment. Men in expensive suits that cost less than Daniel's cufflinks nodded respectfully, some with envy burning behind their practiced smiles. Others calculating how they might get closer to his orbit and the opportunities it promised. At 32 years old, Daniel had accomplished what most Nigerians only dreamed about in their most ambitious fantasies. Okonkwo Holdings controlled shipping lanes across West Africa, owned prime real estate from Lagos to Abuja, and had recently expanded into tech startups that were disrupting traditional banking and making international investors sit up and take notice. His face had graced the cover of Forbes Africa. His Instagram boasted 4 million followers who lived vicariously through his posts of yacht parties in Monaco, ski trips in the Swiss Alps, and bottle service that cost more than most families earned in a year. His latest post showed him beside his Lamborghini with the caption, "God is good, blessed beyond measure." Okonkwo life. On his arm was Chidinma Eze, a former beauty queen whose face graced billboards across Lagos, advertising everything from skincare to luxury apartments. She was stunning in a red dress that cost more than a small car, her makeup flawless, her smile perfect, her grip on Daniel's arm possessive enough to signal to every other woman present that this territory was claimed. But if you looked closely, and most people never did, you would notice how her eyes kept drifting to the Patek Philippe on his wrist, the diamond cufflinks that caught the light, the custom shoes. Chidinma had perfected the art of loving what a man could provide rather than who he actually was. She had calculated her way into Daniel's life with precision, and she intended to hold her position until he put a ring on her finger. Behind them walked Emeka Nwosu. Daniel's best friend since their university days, and now his business partner and chief operations officer. Emeka laughed too loudly at Daniel's jokes, agreed too quickly with his opinions, smiled too widely at his success. Where Daniel was tall and commanding, Emeka was softer, more forgettable, the kind of man who blended into crowds. He had learned early that some men were meant to lead and others were meant to follow, but followers who positioned themselves correctly could still accumulate considerable power. Friendship for Emeka had always been a strategic investment, and Daniel was his highest-yielding portfolio. Inside the club, bottles of Ace of Spades champagne lined the VIP table like golden soldiers. Beautiful women materialized as if summoned by his presence. Everyone wanted to shake his hand, take a selfie, bask in the glow of his magnificence. The music pounded, the lights danced, and Daniel held court like the king he believed himself to be. What none of them knew was that empires built on the backs of broken people eventually collect their debts, and the collector was already on his way. Across the street, at a worn bus stop that had seen better decades, a young woman in faded hospital scrubs waited for a bus already 40 minutes late. Her name was Blessing Nwankwo, and she had just finished a 16-hour double shift at Lagos University Teaching Hospital, where she worked as a cleaner in the intensive care unit. The work was brutal, mopping floors that got dirty again the moment she finished, disposing of biological waste, scrubbing toilets and wiping beds and doing the invisible labor that kept the hospital functioning, while doctors took credit and nurses received gratitude. Her feet ached with a deep, throbbing pain that had become so familiar she barely noticed it. Her back screamed for rest, for a soft bed, for just one night of uninterrupted sleep. But sleep would have to wait, because tomorrow she had another shift, and the day after that, stretching into a future that offered no relief. She was 28, and life had taught her that rest was a luxury the poor could not afford. There was always another bill to pay, another crisis to manage. In her hand, she clutched a phone with a cracked screen, showing a GoFundMe page she refreshed every few minutes with desperate hope. Mama Ngozi, the older woman who had trained her when she started at the hospital 5 years ago, who shared lunch when Blessing couldn't afford to eat, who had become the mother figure she desperately needed after losing her own, had been diagnosed with a brain tumor 3 weeks ago. The surgery cost 5 million naira. The GoFundMe had raised 47,000. Most of that had come from other hospital cleaners, people who had almost nothing giving what little they could spare. Blessing was doing the mathematics of despair, calculating how many years of saving it would take, knowing Mama Ngozi didn't have years, when Daniel's convoy roared past. The Rolls-Royce first, gleaming even in dim streetlight, followed by a Range Rover full of hangers-on. The vehicles cut through a puddle, sending dirty water splashing toward the bus stop. Blessing stepped back just in time to avoid the worst, but some muck caught her shoes, the only work shoes she owned, worn for 3 years because she couldn't afford replacements. She watched the taillights disappear into the Lagos night and felt nothing. Not anger, though perhaps she had the right. Not envy, though the disparity between their lives was obscene. Just tired acceptance. Some people drove Rolls-Royces and others waited at bus stops, and rarely did their worlds intersect. She had no idea their worlds would soon collide in ways neither could imagine. 3 hours later, Daniel sat behind the wheel of his Lamborghini, racing down the Lekki-Epe Expressway at 180 kilometers per hour. The champagne had made him invincible. The cocaine Emeka had slipped him in the club's bathroom had made him immortal. The argument with Chidinma about wanting more commitment, more access to his accounts, always wanting more, had made him reckless with fury. He was on the phone with Emeka, discussing a business deal that couldn't wait. The Adekunle contract is ours. Pay whoever needs paying. Destroy whoever needs destroying. I want that shipping route by Monday. Consider it done, Emeka replied smoothly. He didn't see the truck. It had broken down in the middle lane perhaps an hour earlier, hazard lights dead, driver asleep in the cab. By the time Daniel's headlights illuminated the massive trailer, a wall of metal materializing from darkness, there was no time to brake, no time to swerve, no time to pray. The Lamborghini hit the truck at full speed. Metal screamed against metal with a sound like the world ending. Glass exploded into 1,000 glittering fragments. The car crumpled like paper in an angry fist. And Daniel Okonkwo, the golden boy of Lagos, found himself pinned in wreckage, unable to move, watching his blood pool on Italian leather. His last conscious thought was that the leather would be ruined. He had no idea leather would be the least of his losses. 3 weeks later, Daniel opened his eyes in a private hospital room. The ceiling was white. The sheets were Egyptian cotton. The machines beeped with expensive precision. And he could not feel his body. The doctor delivered the news with practiced devastation. Cervical spinal cord injury. C4 level, quadriplegia. No movement below the neck, permanent. Full-time care required for life. Fix it, Daniel demanded, horrified at how weak his voice sounded. I'll pay whatever it takes. Fly in specialists from anywhere. The doctor's silence was its own answer. For the first time in 32 years, Daniel faced something his money could not buy, his connections could not influence, his charm could not seduce. He faced the permanent limitations of a body that would no longer obey. He screamed until they sedated him into chemical peace. When he woke again, he was in his penthouse, converted into a hospital suite. The bed sat by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lagos. The art mocked him. The Rolex collection in the display case represented wealth he could no longer reach. The city sprawled beneath him, and Daniel realized he was no longer part of it. He was a prisoner in a gilded cage. Chidinma came on the third day. She stood in the doorway, perfectly made up, unable to look at him. Danny, I'm not strong enough for this. I can't watch you like this. I can't be a nurse. Get out. She left her engagement ring on the bedside table. 2 weeks later, she was photographed on a yacht with a footballer who could still walk. Emeka came next with lawyers. Danny, the board is concerned. You should step back. Just temporarily. I'll handle everything. Daniel's foggy mind caught something wrong. What papers are those? Just standard authorization. A thumbprint will work. They pressed his thumb to the document. Later, when Emeka thought Daniel was asleep, he heard him in the hallway. It's done. He's finished. By the time he realizes, Okonkwo Holdings will be mine. The betrayals accumulated. Nurses quit. Housekeepers stopped coming. The phone fell silent. Daniel discovered what true isolation felt like. One evening, he lay watching the sunset. There was a glass of water 8 inches away. He would have traded 100 million naira to drink it. But his arms would not obey. He was Daniel Okonkwo. He owned half of Lagos, and he could not reach a glass of water. That was when blessing walked in. If you've ever felt abandoned when you needed people most, you understand the silence Daniel is drowning in right now. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. The hospital's home care program had assigned her, the cheapest option, for patients whose insurance barely covered basic necessities. She arrived on a Tuesday evening as the sun was setting over Lagos, carrying a small bag that contained everything she would need. A spare set of scrubs, basic toiletries, and that cracked phone still showing Mama Ngozi's stalled GoFundMe page. She walked through the penthouse slowly, her worn shoes silent on marble floors that probably cost more than her entire apartment building in Yaba. Her eyes moved across art that belonged in museums, furniture that looked too expensive to sit on, floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view rich people paid millions to wake up to every morning. Everything gleamed with the cold perfection of wealth that had never known struggle. And in the middle of all this abundance, surrounded by possessions that could have changed thousands of lives, connected to machines that beeped with expensive precision, lay a broken man staring at the ceiling with dead eyes that had forgotten how to hope. Blessing had seen many patients in her years of hospital work. She had seen the wealthy and the poor, the kind and the cruel, those who fought death and those who welcomed it. But she had never seen anyone quite so thoroughly destroyed by circumstance while still technically alive. "Good evening, sir," she said, setting down her bag with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned that dignity came from how you did your work, not from how others saw you. "My name is Blessing. I will be your caregiver." Daniel did not respond. He did not even look at her. He had forgotten what kindness sounded like, and he had no interest in relearning from someone who probably couldn't afford the clothes on her back. The first weeks were war. Daniel attacked her with everything he had left, her worn uniforms washed until the color faded, her village accent betraying humble origins, her poverty clinging to her like perfume. "Is this what my life has become? Being nursed by someone like you, someone who probably grew up without running water?" Blessing adjusted his pillow without changing expression. Her hands remained gentle, even as his words cut. "I grew up in Onitsha, sir. We had running water most days, and I can spell quadriplegia, which is more than some patients manage." She left before he could respond, and Daniel realized she was the first person since his accident who hadn't apologized, cowered, or treated him like a victim. She had simply done her job with quiet dignity he couldn't break. It infuriated him. And beneath the fury, something else stirred, something like respect. But Blessing kept coming, day after day, night after night. She bathed him with clinical efficiency that preserved his dignity. She fed him, waiting patiently when he chewed slowly out of spite. She turned him every 2 hours to prevent bed sores. All without complaint, without asking anything in return. When Daniel demanded to know why she didn't quit, she gave the simplest answer: "Because somebody should." One morning, she wheeled his bed to the windows. Lagos was waking beneath them, buses beginning routes, traders setting up stalls, the city shaking off sleep. "You've lived here 5 years. Have you ever really looked?" The truth was, he hadn't. From this height, he had only seen proof of his elevation above the masses. He had never noticed the woman setting up a pure water stall before sunrise, children walking to school, fishermen bringing in their catch. "I see buildings, traffic, a city." "You see what's easy to see." Blessing pointed toward the mainland. "There's Makoko, floating slum, 20,000 people living on water because they cannot afford land. And there, Ajagunle, jungle city. No good roads, no reliable power. But they wake up every day and fight to live. Why are you showing me this? Because when you were walking, you were too busy running. Now that you're still, maybe you can finally see what was always there." She left him at the window. Daniel watched for hours, how light changed the landscape, how people moved through their lives with resilience he had never needed to develop. He had built an empire here, but never actually seen Lagos or its people. They had been background noise. Now he was invisible, and everyone else came into focus. Late one night, Daniel heard crying from the kitchen. The sound was quiet, almost hidden, the kind of crying that someone does when they don't want to be heard but can no longer contain their grief. He called out, and Blessing appeared in his doorway, wiping her eyes quickly, embarrassed to be caught with her armor down. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to disturb you." "What happened?" She hesitated, clearly debating whether to share anything personal with this man who had shown her nothing but contempt. Then something in her seemed to break. "It's Mama Ngozi. The woman who trained me at the hospital. The one who shared her food with me when I couldn't afford to eat. The one who held my hand when my mother died and told me I wasn't alone in the world." Her voice cracked. "The surgery is in 2 weeks. We've raised 200,000 naira. We need 5 million. The campaign has stalled. Nobody shares anymore. People have their own problems. And I can't lose her too." Daniel looked at the Rolex collection on his wall, illuminated by the soft glow of the city lights below. 12 watches sitting in a display case, accumulated over years of excess, purchased not because he needed them, but because he could. Each one worth more than the surgery that could save a woman's life. The cheapest one could have paid for it twice over. Something cracked inside him. It felt like ice breaking on a frozen river, like something that had been trapped for years finally finding release. "The Daytona," he said. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, softer, less commanding. "Top left, rose gold with the black face. It's worth 15 million naira at current market prices. Sell it. Pay for the surgery. Keep whatever's left for yourself and your colleagues." Blessing stared at him, searching his face for the trick, the manipulation, the angle. In her experience, wealthy men didn't give things away without expecting something in return, usually something that cost the recipient more than the gift was worth. "Sir, I couldn't possibly. I can't move my hands, Blessing. I can't dial a phone. I can't open a laptop. I can't transfer money from my own accounts. I can't save your friend myself." He paused, struggling with words that felt foreign in his mouth, concepts he had never had to express. "But you can. Be my hands. Help me do something good for once in my miserable life. What would you do if someone who had treated you poorly suddenly offered to save someone you loved? Would you trust them?" Blessing sold the watch to a dealer in Victoria Island. Mama Ngozi had her surgery successfully. When Blessing returned with a video of Mama Ngozi crying and praying for the anonymous benefactor, something shifted in Daniel's chest. It felt like purpose, like the first breath after nearly drowning, like maybe his life wasn't over. It had simply changed into something he hadn't yet learned to recognize. If you believe everyone deserves a second chance at becoming who they were meant to be, tap that like button. Let's keep going. The dam had broken. What had started as a single act of unexpected generosity became a flood that nothing could stop. Daniel directed Blessing to access his personal accounts, the ones Emeka hadn't managed to freeze or redirect in his scheme. And together, they discovered the full, horrifying depth of his former friend's betrayal. Shell companies that existed only on paper, but had received millions in consulting fees. Invoices for services that were never rendered by contractors who didn't exist. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Singapore, where hundreds of millions of naira sat, stolen so gradually over the years that the books had always seemed to balance. Over 800 million naira stolen, while Emeka smiled in Daniel's face and called him brother. The old Daniel would have gone to war. He would have hired the most expensive lawyers in Africa, bought judges if necessary, orchestrated a campaign of total annihilation that would have left Emeka with nothing but ashes and regret. He would have destroyed not just Emeka, but everyone connected to him, his family, his friends, anyone who had ever benefited from his stolen wealth. But that Daniel was dead, buried somewhere in the wreckage of a Lamborghini on the Lekki-Epi Expressway. In his place was a man who couldn't even make a fist, who had learned that revenge required energy he no longer possessed, and served purposes he no longer valued. Sell everything, he told Blessing one morning, his voice carrying a strange peace. All the watches, all the cars, the Bentley, the Range Rover, the Mercedes in the garage. Sell everything I don't absolutely need to survive. And do what with the money, sir? Give it away, directly, not through foundations that take half for administration or disappear into corruption. Find people who need help, real help, and help them. No middlemen, no publicity. Just find people who are struggling and give them what they need. So Blessing became his eyes, his hands, his voice, his connection to a world he had spent his entire life ignoring. She found the single mother in Surulere, whose brilliant son had been accepted to one of the best secondary schools in Lagos, but couldn't afford the fees. They paid for 4 years up front and bought him books, uniforms, and a laptop. She found the mechanic in Yaba, whose workshop had burned down in an electrical fire. Taking his entire livelihood and leaving him with nothing but debt, they gave him enough to rebuild better than before and hire 2 assistants. She found the clinic in Ajagunla that was running out of basic medicines, turning away patients because there was nothing left to treat them with. They stocked its pharmacy for 6 months and paid the rent for a year. Each gift was anonymous. Daniel wanted only the feeling that came with helping, warmth in his chest, purpose, knowledge that his money was finally doing something. Blessing returned with stories. The mother who wept until she couldn't breathe. The mechanic who repeated, "God is real," like a prayer. The doctor who asked, "Who sent you?" with suspicion, because in Lagos, nothing good came without strings, and cried with relief when she believed there were none. She asked who you are, Blessing reported one evening. What did you tell her? Someone trying to make things right. Daniel smiled, the first genuine smile since his accident. That's closer to the truth than anything I've said about myself in years. But giving away money attracted attention. Emeka learned through his network. If Daniel emptied his accounts, the theft would be exposed. He needed Daniel declared mentally incompetent. He hired doctors willing to lie, lawyers willing to manipulate. He filed an emergency petition claiming Daniel's paralysis had affected his brain. He even brought Chidinma, who testified Daniel had always been unstable. The hearing was scheduled for Tuesday. The night before, Blessing sat with Daniel, carrying something heavy. Sir, I need to tell you something before tomorrow. She took a breath. Then another. My father's name was Chukwudi Nwankwo. He owned a small transport company in Onitsha, 3 buses. 15 years ago, Okonkwo Holdings wanted his roots. When he refused to sell, your company destroyed him. False accusations, pressure on suppliers, loans called in all at once through banks your company controlled. He lost everything. Daniel felt cold settle in his stomach. He remembered nothing of this, just another obstacle removed, another signature on documents he never bothered to read. He died of a heart attack 6 months later, in a single room we were renting. He was 53. I was 19. My mother didn't survive him by more than a year. The silence was the loudest thing Daniel had ever heard. I know who you are, sir. I've known since I walked into this penthouse. Why? Daniel whispered. Why didn't you let me suffer? Why didn't you take revenge? Blessing's eyes held something he didn't deserve. Because my father didn't raise me to become the thing that destroyed him. Because hatred is a chain, and I decided years ago I wouldn't wear it. And because I've watched you change. The man who destroyed my father couldn't have given away his watches, couldn't have cared about strangers in Ajagunle. You're not that man anymore. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Blessing. I know, and that's why I'm going to help you win tomorrow. She had every reason to let him suffer, every reason to walk away. But she stayed. If you believe in the power of forgiveness, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. The Lagos High Court was a beautiful colonial building that had witnessed more than its share of injustice, dressed in expensive legal robes. Lawyers with briefcases full of documents and heads full of strategies filled its halls every day, fighting battles that had little to do with truth and everything to do with money and power. Emeka arrived that Tuesday morning with his team of the most expensive lawyers in Lagos, his hired medical experts who had been paid handsomely to say whatever was needed, his purchased witnesses who had rehearsed their testimonies. Confidence radiated from him like heat from a Lagos afternoon sun. He had planned for every contingency, prepared for every possibility. This would be easy, a paralyzed man against the full weight of money and manipulation. The outcome in his mind was already predetermined. Then Blessing walked in, pushing Daniel's wheelchair herself. It was his first time leaving the penthouse since the accident, his first time facing the world that had already forgotten him. He looked diminished in the wheelchair, a shadow of the commanding figure who had once made this city tremble. But his eyes were clear, alert, focused with an intensity that made Emeka's confident smile flicker for just a moment. The hearing began with Emeka's lead lawyer presenting the case for incompetence with smooth confidence. Dr. Adaeze, the same doctor who had delivered Daniel's original diagnosis, now revealed to be on Emeka's payroll all along, testified that the patient had suffered significant cognitive decline along with his physical injuries. Chidinma took the stand in designer clothes and testified with practiced tears that Daniel had always been emotionally volatile and that his recent behavior was proof that he had lost touch with reality. A parade of medical professionals agreed, reading from scripts they had been provided, that giving away millions of naira to strangers was clear evidence of diminished mental capacity. Then Blessing asked to address the court. The judge, intrigued by this unusual request from a hospital caregiver in a proceeding about billionaire financial affairs, allowed it. She approached the bench with a folder she had spent the previous week compiling, her village accent steady and clear, her dignity unshakable, despite the expensive suits staring at her with contempt. "Your Honor, my name is Blessing Nwankwo. I have been Mr. Okonkwo's primary caregiver for 4 months. I have spent every day with him, every night, monitoring his condition, managing his care, observing his mental state. I can tell you with absolute certainty that his mind is as sharp as it ever was, sharper, perhaps, now that he has time to actually think. But I don't expect you to take my word for it. I expect you to examine the evidence." She opened the folder. "These are financial records showing Mr. Emeka Nwosu has been systematically stealing from Okonkwo Holdings for at least 3 years. Shell companies registered to addresses that don't exist, payments to contractors who never performed any work, transfers to offshore accounts that Mr. Okonkwo knew nothing about. The total amount stolen exceeds 800 million naira." Emeka's lawyers were on their feet, objecting strenuously. But Blessing continued with calm determination that no amount of legal theatrics could shake. "These are signed testimonies from 23 individuals who have received charitable assistance from Mr. Okonkwo in the past months, not delusional, random gifts. Carefully targeted help for medical bills, school fees, business recovery. Each one verified, documented, legitimate. I have letters here from mothers whose children are now in school, from a doctor whose clinic can now treat patients, from a mechanic who rebuilt his workshop and is now employing 2 other young men." She turned to the judge with quiet confidence. "And finally, Your Honor, these are video recordings that Mr. Okonkwo has been making over the past several weeks, documenting his thoughts and intentions. He recorded them specifically, in case someone tried exactly what is being attempted today. I believe the court will find that they demonstrate not only mental competence, but moral clarity that many people with working legs never achieve. The videos played. Daniel spoke with painful honesty, acknowledging his past without excuses. I spent 32 years taking routes from small business owners, dignity from people in my way. Now I cannot even take a sip of water. And losing everything has been the only way I could see what matters. I just want to give away what I can. That's not madness. That's the first sane thing I've ever done. The judge took less than an hour. Petition dismissed. Emeka remanded for embezzlement investigation. Chidinma advised to seek counsel for perjury. Justice, for once, worked the way it should. Back at the penthouse, Daniel asked, "What will you do when there's nothing left to give?" Blessing smiled. Mama Ngozi always said I had hands for nursing. Real nursing. I wanted school, but money. Then let me pay for it. Not as charity, as the smallest piece of what I owe your family. She was quiet, then nodded. But I'm not leaving until you don't need me anymore. I'll always need you, Blessing. You taught me how to see. True wealth isn't what you hold, it's what you give. If this story has touched your heart, drop a comment and tell me what moment moved you most. The months that followed were the most peaceful Daniel had ever known. The fortune dwindled, but purpose grew stronger. Blessing found more people who needed help, a widow whose children faced expulsion, a young tailor starting a business, a teacher whose school had no books. Each gift was smaller now, but somehow felt larger. Emeka's trial made national news. 15 years for 800 million in theft. Daniel was asked for a statement and declined. Donate something to prison education programs. Maybe he'll come out better. Chidinma attempted a return, tears ready, apologies rehearsed. Daniel had Blessing tell her he was unavailable, then changed his mind. Let her in. Chidinma entered like she was walking onto a stage. I don't hate you, Chidinma. You looked at me and saw a meal ticket. When the meal ended, you left. That's honest in its own way. But the man you wanted is dead. The man in this bed wants nothing you can offer. Go find your happiness. Don't come back. She left without a word. Some doors close so completely they don't even make a sound. One evening, Daniel called Blessing to his bedside. I have an idea. For what's left. Not the accounts, the penthouse itself. He had been thinking for weeks. The hospital's rehabilitation center was overcrowded with spinal injury patients who had nowhere to go when discharged. Many ended up trapped in small apartments, slowly giving up because they thought their lives were over. What if this place became a rehabilitation center, where people like me could learn to live again with dignity, community, hope? I could live in one room. You could run the program after nursing school. His voice broke. And I want to call it the Chukwudi Nwankwo Center, after your father. Blessing couldn't speak. Tears came so hard she had to leave the room. When she returned, eyes swollen, she was smiling with a peace that seemed to glow from inside. My father would have liked you. Not the old you, but this you. He would have respected what you're trying to do. Do you like this version of me? She took his hand, the hand that couldn't feel her touch, but somehow felt it anyway. I'm still deciding. Ask me again in a few years. The Chukwudi Nwankwo Center opened 6 months later. Hospital beds replaced designer furniture. Physical therapy equipment stood where art once hung. Laughter and struggle and hope filled spaces that had known only silence and excess. Daniel lived in what had been a guest room. He watched patients arrive broken and leave with dignity restored. Watched Blessing complete nursing school with top honors, then take over the center's operations. Watched his name fade from society pages and become a quiet legend among those who had been helped. Some evenings, Blessing would wheel him to the window. They would watch the sun paint Lagos in gold and amber and rose. When you cannot move, Daniel said. You finally learn to see. And when you cannot hold on to your wealth, you discover what is truly worth holding. I lost everything: legs, arms, company, fortune, pride. And in losing everything, I found the only things that matter: purpose, service. People who stay not because of what you can give them, but because of who you choose to become. Blessing squeezed his shoulder. Outside, Lagos hummed with its eternal struggle. Traffic and traders, dreams and desperation, the million small stories unfolding between poverty and hope. My father used to say, money walks, but character stands. I never understood until I met you. Which version of me? Both. The first taught me what money without character looks like. This version taught me what character after money looks like. Together, they taught me everything about who I want to be. Daniel was poor now by any measure. The man who once owned half of Lagos lived in a single room, dependent on others for every need. But watching another day end over the city, he understood something his younger self could never have grasped. He had never been richer. They say in the end, we are measured not by what we accumulated, but by what we gave away. Not by hands that grasped, but by hands that opened. Not by eyes that judged, but by eyes that finally learned to see. Daniel Okonkwo lost everything. And in losing everything, he found what had been missing all along: a purpose worth living for, a legacy worth leaving behind, and someone who stayed, not despite what he had done, but because of who he chose to become. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. I'd love to know where this story has traveled. Which moment touched you most? When he gave away his first watch? When Blessing revealed who she really was? When the center opened with her father's name? If this story moved you, if it made you think about forgiveness, or second chances, or what really matters, please tap that like button. Subscribe if you haven't yet. And share this with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to become who you were meant to be. I'll see you in the next story. Until then, take care of yourselves and take care of each other.